The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, my name is Marcus Hanscom. I'm the Director of Graduate Admission here at Roger Williams University, and put this session together for you just to talk about how to really kill it on your graduate application. And this is not specific to Roger Williams. I'm talking more broadly about how you can really do well as you're applying to graduate school. So I hope there's some helpful tips for you here, and certainly please use me as a resource. I'm happy to help answer any questions you have, whether you're applying to Roger Williams or elsewhere. And really, our goal is to make sure that you have a successful graduate school experience, wherever that may be. And one of the ways you start with that is to really make sure that you're applying to the right place. We know with undergrad, you can choose a school maybe because it's close to home. Maybe it's got a lot of great clubs and things to do on campus. Maybe it's close to something you really like. Maybe you want to be right in the middle of a major city. But what really is important at the graduate level is focusing on the right fit for you in terms of what your future really looks like. At the undergrad level, you're looking for kind of an experience. You're looking both at your extracurriculars as well as your academic experience. But as you get into your master's and certainly doctoral level work, if you choose to go that far, you're choosing programs and campuses because they're going to get you to whatever that next step is, whether that be getting a license or getting a specific job or getting just a credential like an MBA that separates you from the pack and is really necessary in certain industries, or it's going on to get your doctorate because you want to teach or you want to become a doctor or you want to become a veterinarian. Whatever those things are, you need to find the right schools that are going to get you to those outcomes. And not every school and every program is treated the same. They all do program content differently. They might have different faculty. They might have different research, different internship opportunities. So there's a lot of other things to think about as you're going into graduate school. And for many of you, especially if you're a younger student, you're maybe not using your parents to help guide you as much as you may have in the past. So this is much more on your shoulders on really forging that next step for you. So some of the things you should be considering as far as fit, and notice I put location and cost at the end of the list. They are important, but they shouldn't be your primary factors as you're considering going to graduate school. So first and foremost, you're thinking about the content of the program. If you want to become an architect, like the young lady in the photo, you have to select a program that has a license-eligible degree so that you ultimately can become an architect, at least here in the United States. If you want to study public health, for example, which in the current times is really important. Obviously, there's only a certain number of public health programs in the country, but maybe you want to study public health in the context of certain community outreach or certain types of response or types of outbreaks or pandemics in this case. So all of these things are important as you're thinking about content. And again, the content varies from school to school. So you're going to be selecting schools based on what your individual interests are. That also means you might be aligning with specific faculty. This is particularly true at the doctoral level, but can be also true at the master's level if you're thinking of doing research. So aligning yourself with faculty that have a lot of background. Similarly, you may be going into more experiential programs like criminal justice or forensic science to some degree. These programs where you might be doing more internships, you're going to want to align with a school that has internship opportunities, but also perhaps faculty that have work experience in these disciplines. So, for example, I've seen criminal justice programs that have former agents from the FBI or the Department of Defense that teach on their staffs. That might be a good connection to the field. Maybe you're going into a business program and you want to have financial analysts that have worked on Wall Street or worked for major firms. Or maybe you're going into accounting and need somebody who's been a CPA. These types of things are really good to connect you while in the classroom with the faculty and the quote-unquote real world in those areas, but also ultimately with the internships if you need them and job opportunities at the end. So those outcomes are really going to be critical, and you're making an investment of time and money in most cases in your future by going into graduate school, whether master's or doctoral or both. And so you want to make sure that the outcomes of these programs are going to meet what your goals are. And so one easy example for us is we have a forensic psychology program. We often have students that watch television shows like Law and Order, CSI, and so on, and they say, I want to become a criminal profiler. Well, profiling is largely more of a law enforcement discipline than it is a psychology discipline. So most forensic psychology programs aren't necessarily focusing on profiling. There are some programs out there that do a little bit of that, and they have a tendency to lean more toward criminal justice. They have maybe more applied learning opportunities and internships. They might have faculty that are from the FBI or CIA. They might be located in areas that have access to internships in those areas. So they're a little bit different. But when you think about what you want in terms of an outcome, if somebody came to us and said, I want to be a profiler, our program would not get a student there. So we would discourage a student from considering our program because that's not the job opportunity that most students are getting coming out of our programs. So make sure you talk to the faculty, talk to staff when you're considering programs, considering institutions, and find out what those outcomes are. Any good faculty or any good program is going to be able to promote what their outcomes are and how successful their students are coming out of the program. Now, I mentioned location and cost. Obviously, for some of us, you may not be able to just pick up and go, even though this is a great time if you're younger, especially, and if you're coming out of undergrad, maybe you don't have commitments to a spouse or to children or to family, you can pick up and go somewhere else. So this is a great opportunity to do that if you have that flexibility. But there are costs and realistic financials that come along with that as well. I caution students on looking at the price tag too much because you may focus on something that's really inexpensive now, but perhaps doesn't get you the outcome that you want in the long run. So I know most of us probably wouldn't sacrifice a few $1,000s if it meant that we would get our dream career later on. So think about how important those pieces are weighing in. It's very easy to be short-sighted and say, I want to get something close to home, something that's inexpensive. But the reality is, for most of us, if you want something over the long term that's going to get you a certain outcome, you may have to invest more money in doing that, or even invest in actually relocating somewhere for some time to go to the program that may not be in your backyard, but will get you to that outcome. I also encourage students to think about fit in terms of how you are a fit for that intended program. When we're considering applicants for our programs, some of our programs have more stringent GRE requirements or grade requirements, and while others are maybe a little bit more flexible, some programs require prior experience while others do not. So these things are all going to factor into our consideration of you coming into our program, and especially smaller programs where kind of might be a cohorted-like model where you're following classes largely together. The faculty look to assemble a cohort that is going to contribute similarly and equally to the program. Maybe you're going to get along well, maybe have similar interests or similar drive or similar long-term goals. Those types of things really align well to make a good quality classroom experience. So our faculty are going to look at all those various pieces in addition to your grades and test scores. I say this also because I often have students where I talk to them about a certain program may have high research requirements and a higher GRE or test score requirement. And they'll come to me and say, well, I have a 2.5 GPA and I had 10th percentile GREs. Now, unfortunately, while we're empathetic to that situation, the reality is that's a low GPA and is a low GRE performance. So those two pieces of information they're not going to align a student well with a program that has high expectations for a GPA or GRE. So as you're doing your research, find out what types of scores, what types of applicants that programs are looking for, and be honest with yourself on whether you fit that criteria or not. Because my goal is not to have students just apply to a bunch of programs and get a lot of denials. The goal is for you to apply to the right places where you're aligned well and they're aligned well for you, and ultimately you get in, you have a really good experience, and ultimately get the outcome that you want. I hate sending denials. As a director of grad admissions, that's one of the worst parts of my job is signing denial letters. What I want is for students to come to us and say, I'm a good fit for your program because I meet these criteria, but you're a great fit for me because you're going to get me to that dream career. And ultimately, I hope that student calls me in 5, 10, 15 years and says, going to Roger Williams was the best decision I ever made, or going to XYZ school was the best decision I ever made. Thanks for guiding me there because I was a better fit for that program. So when you're thinking about graduate school in general, getting to the right place with the right fit is our ultimate priority for you, not forcing you to Roger Williams or forcing you to any other school, but it's instead finding the right fit for what your goals are ultimately in the long run. Some questions to ask of yourself right now. Ultimately, what is it that you want to do in the future? If you know that you want to teach at a university, in most cases, you need a PhD for that. So you think about long term, you have to do some research. You have to certainly put in some time and money, although occasionally at PhD levels, you'll have opportunities for funding. But getting a PhD is likely going to happen, or going to be a necessity for that. If you're going into business, for example, most business bachelor's degrees are so common now, and arguably MBAs are even fairly common now, but MBAs are still almost becoming a need to have rather than a nice to have. So certain degrees are going to be necessary for you. Psychology is a good example as well. If you want to become a practicing professional counselor or a mental health counselor, you have to have at least your master's. And if you're going as a master's level clinician, in most states, you have to have 60 graduate credits in your master's degree. So selecting the right program that will get you a license is necessary going into that work. Obviously, if you want to become a doctor, you need to get your MD. There's other requirements depending on types of programs you're going into. Social work's another one where you need a master's to become a clinical MSW, licensed clinical social worker. So those are really important. If you want to teach, then obviously you want to select more research-oriented programs in most cases. If you want to practice, then maybe you want a license-eligible program that has some internship opportunities. If you know you want to do research, whether you go right from your undergraduate study into a doctoral program, which is a big leap for most programs, although it's not impossible, you may be looking at a master's degree in the middle as an intermediate step. And if that's what you want, you need to select master's programs that have a lot of research opportunity for you. So you need to look at programs that might have you developing a thesis, producing research, presenting at conferences, and so on. If you want to obtain a license, again, I mentioned you have to find a license eligible program, but be smart about that. There are a lot of programs that will tell you how great the experience is and how it's going to be fun and get you certain outcomes. But if it's not meeting the licensure requirements, and often students I've heard of going into these programs that might be less credits, they sound good because they're cheaper, but then in the reality on the other end is they're not license eligible and often have to go on to get more credits, and sometimes more credits than they wouldn't have had to in the beginning to be eligible for their license. So do your research up front. Think about the things that you want to do. Will your chosen industry or chosen job require a license? Will it require a doctorate, or is a master's okay? Or is a master's or doctorate not required at all? Those are all things to consider. I know a lot of students also have a tendency to get doctoral studies stuck in their minds. Like, if I want to do XYZ career, I have to get a doctorate. And maybe that's because somebody told them that they should. In some cases, I talk to a lot of first generation students that for them, education is a sense of accomplishment, and we applaud that. But we also don't want to encourage students for going further, deeper in time and debt, potentially, if they don't need to. So we always try to balance the reality of certain outcomes and the things that you need, and ultimately what that time is. Any business students would understand the concept of opportunity cost. When you go to graduate school, so master's level, typically 2 years, depending on the program. PhDs are going to run you about 5 years in most cases, give or take. This is time that if you're going into a discipline that requires a master's or requires a doctorate, will be necessary. So it's time that you have to spend regardless. But in some cases, if you're not required to get one of those credentials to go into the work that you're doing, the opportunity cost of that time is foregone salaries, foregone income. So if you're going to school for 5 years, that's 5 years of time you maybe could have been earning an income that makes it maybe easier to pay any short-term bills that you have or pay back some of your undergraduate debt and so on. But graduate school in most cases, at least at the master's level, is going to help students. And obviously in the long run, your income potential, and there's plenty of studies that show your income potential is exponentially higher if you earn a master's or a PhD or another type of graduate degree. So certainly there's value in doing that, but we always try to have honest conversations with students about what's really necessary. And sometimes getting your PhD may not be necessary, may not be something that you really should do in the short run. And in some cases, students find that maybe they'll get their master's to open the door to certain jobs in certain industries, and then they go back maybe on a part-time basis to do their doctorate later on. And that might be a better plan and gives you some opportunity to earn money in the shorter time frame. And students like in psychology go to a license eligible degree, or even social work, they can get a license eligible degree after their master's, maybe go work, become licensed, make some money, and then ultimately go back for their doctorate later on. They're able to open doors and be able to practice with that master's level credential. If you go right into certain programs, you might not have those options available to you. So those are all things to consider. As you're applying to grad school, these are the types of things that you're going to be asked to submit. Obviously, you'll have an application, and I'll talk in a minute about the types of applications that are out there. Most graduate programs are going to require test scores of some sort, and unfortunately, the GRE is limiting here, so bear with me. But some programs require the GRE, which is essentially the graduate school version of the SAT. It's the graduate records examination. There's also what's called the Miller Analogies Test. There's the GMAT, the Graduate Management Admissions Test. There's MCAT for med school. So there's a number of different standardized tests. So you may be asked for a standardized test score. Those are things you definitely want to prepare for and do well and study and take practice tests and so on. I'll talk more about that. All schools will ask for some sort of written narrative about you, and that'll be a personal statement or a letter of intent. Occasionally, you'll be given instructions on what those should be, maybe questions that you should answer. Other times, it's left wide open. So there's some more detail that you can provide about yourself beyond the application, and I'll get into that. Letters of recommendation will be required for virtually all programs. Typically, 2 is common for master's level students. You may be asked for 3 depending on the program. So just pay attention again to the number and the types of them. We'll talk about that. Your transcripts, and this will include all undergraduate transcripts, regardless if you took one class at a community college over the summer and then you took the bulk of your studies on campus, or if you took pieces at 5 different schools. We need to have every single one of your transcripts sent to us, and they have to be from the school themselves, so it has to be official. Many schools will send an electronic transcript now, or if you get a paper transcript, it just has to be sent to us officially from the registrar's office at your campus. There's also an interview required for many programs. This is very common at the doctoral level. It's not as common, though it is required for a number of master's programs. Check into that. Sometimes those interviews will be done virtually, especially at times like now where everyone's working remote due to the coronavirus. So make sure you follow instructions on that. Be prepared. Dress appropriately if you're going to be doing a virtual interview or on campus for that matter. Make sure that you take it seriously and show that you appreciate the opportunity to interview and that you're taking that opportunity very seriously on the opportunity to join the program. So dressing for success in that regard is really important. Some other materials you might be asked for, programs like architecture or art and design programs might ask for a portfolio. Sometimes a marketing or a graphic design program will ask for the same. This is really just representative of types of work that you've already done. You'll also be asked for a resume pretty commonly for more applied programs, and especially for part-time programs for working professionals, they'll be asking for a resume. You might also be asked for a writing sample for a research program. So just follow the instructions that are given to you, and that research sample may have some specific details on what they're looking for, so make sure you follow that. Make sure you use the right application. The application, as you're applying for grad school, you'll see that there's a number of systems that are centralized application systems. This is similar to the common application at the undergraduate level. However, most of the common application or centralized application systems available at the graduate level are program or discipline specific. So you see like OTCAS, that's for all occupational therapy programs. There's PTCAS for physical therapy, there's engineering CAS, there's a new ARC-CAS for architecture. So there's a lot of different centralized systems. Law schools, this is common. Med school, this is common. A lot of the health sciences have their own CAS system. So make sure you follow the instructions from your individual schools on what type of application system you should use. Many of us have our own institutional applications instead of centralized application. So just pay attention to that and submit the appropriate not only application, but then your materials. And for many of the central application systems, you're sending your materials to the application service provider as opposed to the institution. So if I was having you submit an application for Roger Williams University, and we don't currently participate in the CAS, but if there was, say, Unicast, or that you were applying to Roger Williams and a series of other schools through Unicast, you would submit your application there, and you would send your transcripts once to Unicast, and then they distribute it electronically to the various schools that participate in Unicast, and obviously the schools that you're choosing to apply for. Similarly, your test scores will go there, personal statements, and so on. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the standardized test. This is something you really have to study for. These tests do matter. There's been a lot more debate of late about some schools relaxing some of these requirements, particularly in light of the coronavirus. But make sure you pay attention to what the requirements are for your various schools. These are standardized tests that essentially provide a level playing field as faculty are evaluating applicants to their programs. You want to study for these exams. The best way to study is take practice exams that many of these companies make available on their websites. So, for example, the GRE is administered by ETS, the Educational Testing Service. Similarly, the GMAT is administered by the Graduate Management Admissions Council. Similarly, the LSAT is done for Law School Admission Council. So if you go to their websites, you can take a look at preparation materials. You can get practice tests there. For example, ETS offers 2 fully scored GRE exams. So you're actually doing the full exam twice, and they'll be fully scored so you can see your results and why the answer was right or wrong. And you can pay $49 to get access to 2 of those 2 tests. So it's pretty reasonable for studying that way. You can also get study books for these various tests, and there's a lot of great resources online. Taking the practice tests helps for 2 reasons. One, it helps you understand the format of the questions, the structure of the exam, the timing of the exam, all of those things that can produce a lot of anxiety in and of themselves, and then also help you with understanding the types of content that you'll be running into on those exams. So it's really multifaceted as far as how these will help you. And I always encourage students to take those practice tests, because if you can eliminate some of that anxiety around the structure and the timing, the types of questions, and you don't have to read instructions, those types of things, you can take that worry off your mind when you go in to actually sit for one of these exams. So definitely get comfortable with those practice tests as best as you can. On the master's level, most programs are going to require the GRE or the GMAT for business programs more commonly, and business programs actually more often than not now accept either one of those tests. JD programs for law always require the LSAT. And then the GRE is, while it's required for many programs, it's not always required. Some programs don't have a test score requirement at all. Others have an optional requirement, especially now. So check into what those requirements are. You might also see a Miller Analogies test required for programs like psychology, particularly at the master's level. PhD programs will often ask for the GRE, and then may ask for some subject tests more commonly at the PhD level than the master's level, but those are things to consider. Your personal statement or your purpose statement, often it could also be referred to as your letter of intent, is really an opportunity to expand a little bit more upon who you are beyond what we see on paper in your application. This is not something where you want to say, I was born in Boston and I grew up with 3 siblings and these are the things that we did. This is not an autobiography time. This is an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about you as a person, what you bring perhaps to the classroom, what drives you, what are you interested in, where do you find your purpose, what's your vision for your life, what's your vision for your work in the future, how do you envision that the program will help you get there, what value will you add to the program, if you want to align with certain research that a certain faculty member is doing, that certainly helps. Doctoral applications will ask you to identify faculty that you want to work with. Master's programs commonly do not. But this is a good opportunity perhaps in your personal statement if you're going into a research program to say that you want to work with a certain faculty member. So I always encourage students to think about that. But really, this is an opportunity for us to see you as a fit for our program. So talk about your demeanor and your character, the things that you care about and you're passionate about. What's your work ethic like? How do you work with others? What do you want to do in the field? How does the program align with your career goals? How does your experience align with you becoming a student in a particular program? All of those things will help us get a really clearer picture on who you are and also get a sense of your writing ability, and that's important as well. Your letters of recommendation, I think it goes without saying, but find faculty or staff or employers. They have to be professional recommendations, but find people who know you. And you'd be surprised how many times I see letters of recommendation that are very short. Maybe it's a faculty member they haven't seen in a while, and so the student said, "Oh, it's on my freshman English teacher. I really liked him, so I'm going to have him write the letter for me." And that letter often comes in with saying, Johnny was a great student in my class. I only got to know him for one semester 4 years ago. I haven't seen him since then, but I think he's a great guy and wish him well. And that's not going to help you getting into most graduate programs. What we want is faculty that know you directly and can be able to speak to whether it be your research acumen or your internship ability, your ability to handle conflict, your ability to work in teams, working successfully in the classroom, being detail-oriented. All of those types of things faculty can speak to, or an employer could speak to, and how you are in the workplace, especially if you are a working professional now and you're applying to graduate programs. And this is an opportunity for them to talk about how you function in a professional setting and what you contribute to your field. Those things are really important. You do not want to use personal references here, so no friends, no family. This is all professional in terms of employers, clients. I've seen coworkers here and there, although I wouldn't say they're ideal. And if you're in school now, of course, faculty. One of the most important things, though, is to follow instructions. Some of your programs may, depending on the type of program you're applying for, some may want 2 or 3 letters from faculty only. So that limits you in terms of the type of people you can ask. In other cases, it may be more important that you have more professional or employer type recommendations. So emphasize people that can speak to your work ethic outside of school. In many cases, if there's not a whole lot of directive one way or the other, finding a mixture of both is helpful. And if you're a college senior now or college junior, think about maybe a faculty member and maybe an internship supervisor or somebody who's supervised your research as you're presenting. Maybe if you're doing research your senior year, or somebody who can talk about your research acumen, especially if you're going into a master's research program. So think about all of those pieces and make sure you're kind of getting the right mix of recommenders to help you the most with getting into your programs. Your letters of recommendation can be extremely insightful to the faculty, and sometimes it's as much of what the recommender says as what they don't say. So picking good recommenders who know you well, and if you haven't seen them in a while, but you really want them to write your letter, offer to bring them your resume, take them out for coffee, tell them what you've been up to in a while, if it's been a while. All of those things will be helpful in terms of getting a really good recommendation. Some of the other things that you're going to be asked for, I mentioned transcripts. Again, follow instructions from your schools. In very rare circumstance, schools will waive certain types of transcripts, especially if they're hard to get. But you're always going to have to get your bachelor's transcript. Any academic credit, you're going to have to get those transcripts. Often schools now will accept unofficial transcripts during the application process. So if you're able to get an unofficial one, even off a student portal, that may be acceptable, but check with your schools. And then if you're admitted and you ultimately choose to go to a particular school, you'll have to submit your official final transcripts that show your degree earned and all of that before you enroll in classes. So make sure you follow instructions on that. I mentioned interviews before. Make sure you're punctual. Do your research about a school. If you're going in there and interviewing about a program, be familiar with the faculty there, the types of students in the program, maybe the outcomes of the program, what the curriculum is like. Do as much research as you can ahead of time so that you come in there very well informed, just like a job interview, where you'd understand what the institution is all about and ultimately maybe what the program is about, and help align and help the faculty understand why you should be in that program. And I've seen where an interview, even an informal interview, has made a student's application decision go from a denial to an accept. And often this has been where students maybe on paper aren't as strong, either with a GPA or GRE, but then they have the opportunity to interview with a faculty member and really talk about their experience and things. And you all of a sudden hear how passionate they are about the field, passionate about the work they do. Maybe they've got this really super strong work ethic. And these types of things aren't necessarily borne out in their grades, but you get to talk to them. And I've had faculty say, I want that student in our program. And so that's really helpful. Even if you don't have a required interview, maybe get the opportunity to talk to faculty if you can at each of your programs that you're interested in, and really kind of sell that. Give them an opportunity to hear who you are beyond your transcript and your test scores, because for most students, that opportunity really changes the whole game for them. So take advantage of that. If there's any other additional materials that are asked of you, make sure you follow the specific instructions and requirements. And, one thing I have here is put your name on things. I'd be surprised how many letters of intent or recommendations that come in that don't have a student's name on them. Also, common things like if you're using a personal statement that you're going to maybe send to multiple schools, changing the school name, things that are basic like that, because attention to detail is important for most faculty as they're evaluating students. And if they get a letter of recommendation or rather a letter of intent that says, I'm interested in Z school and you're Y school, well, that's not going to show that you're paying attention to detail. So make sure you check those little things. Always be honest in your applications. Don't sugarcoat your experience, but don't undersell. But be honest about the types of experience that you have, your academic experiences, perhaps internships, research, and so on. If you struggled early on in college, I think one thing that I always admire about students is say, like, look, I'm a senior now in college. I really messed around the first year or two in college, maybe partied too hard. But then I really got my act together because I realized my future is more important. And they show this level of maturity and growth, and their junior and senior year grades totally turned around, and they brought their cumulative GPA up to something that's a little bit more reasonable. That at least gives us a narrative to show that the student is mature enough to say, I wasn't doing the things I need to do to be successful, so I changed that, and I'm committed to being successful going forward. That speaks volumes to faculty and to staff. So make sure you're honest with where you are and the things that you're hoping to get out of your programs. And the last thing we want is for you to articulate that you want something specific out of a program, and we feel like you're aligned well with our program, and then when you get to the program, you go, oh, that's not what I wanted. So be honest with yourself about the things that you're looking for, and honest with the things that you bring to the table, whether it be your experience or otherwise, so that we can really assess and meet in the middle and find to make sure that, again, it's the appropriate fit for you and for us if you pursue our program. Follow instructions, be detail-oriented, make sure that you do the things that are necessary. This includes meeting deadlines. If there's a deadline of February 1st for your application, don't apply on January 30th. It's a subconscious message that you send to us when you apply right before the deadline, especially if you have to do things like take the GRE. I can't tell you how frustrating it can be for faculty and staff to hear a student who is really interested in our program and wants to pursue it, and they're applying the day before the deadline, and then they go, oh yeah, I haven't taken the GRE yet. That doesn't show, again, things like following instructions and paying attention to things and doing your research. We want to see students that are really on top of that. So if you're really interested in the program, even if we're your fallback school, this is especially true of students that might be applying to doctoral programs and they apply to master's programs as a backup, apply earlier so that at least indicates to us that you're considering our program, you're interested in the program, and want to move forward. And this is true of all graduate programs. So don't apply at the deadline, but apply in a reasonable amount of time. And I'm saying if you have a February 1st deadline, maybe apply in December. And, PhD programs will have December deadlines, so apply even sooner than that, obviously, for doctoral programs. It also gives you some breathing room if you have to take tests or you have to ask for letters of recommendation. And I will say that letters of recommendation tend to take the longest in the application process. That's not universal, but that can be the most troubling for most students, because when you're asking recommenders, often the best recommenders are also the busiest people on campus. So they might not have a whole lot of extra time to help you. So ask them early on and make sure you can get a really good recommendation from them. Plus, it also helps to say, hey, Joe Smith, I really want you to write me a letter of recommendation. And he says back to you, when do you need it by? And you say, well, I'd like to have it maybe 2 weeks from today, rather than, hey, I need it tomorrow. That gives some breathing room to faculty or your employers when you're asking for letters of recommendation. So do that with a reasonable amount of time and demonstrate to us that you're meeting a deadline. Also, stay in touch with us, ask questions, be communicating with us virtually, especially now during the coronavirus. The more that we know that you're interested in a program, the more that we know that you're doing your research, the more we can advocate, especially those of us in admissions, and we're talking to you more regularly, we can say to the faculty, hey, Dr. So-and-so, Ashley's been reaching out to me every other week and she's really interested in the program. We could tell she's passionate about being here. Do you have a decision for her? That's a different conversation than a faculty member calling me and saying, hey, do you know this Ashley person? And I go, I haven't heard from her at all since she submitted her application. That's a different conversation. So the more that you're engaged with us, the more that speaks well to your application and ultimately can kind of subconsciously help you through the process. So, and that includes, if you can, visit campuses. Obviously, you can't visit campus right now during the coronavirus. It's March 31st, 2020 when I'm recording this. But when you can visit campus, take that opportunity and go there, or at least join us for a virtual event, go on to a virtual accepted student day or virtual open house or information session, Skype with a faculty member, do a virtual meeting with one of us in admissions. Again, the more engaged, the more we understand who you are, the more we know beyond what's on your paper application file, the more we can advocate for you being a good member of our academic community and a good member of the program. So take advantage of opportunities to engage with us, however that has to happen. And ultimately, when you can visit campuses, try to go and visit campus, even if you can't see specific people or meet or sit in on a class, although ideally you'd go and sit in on a class, meet with current students, meet staff, meet faculty, and so on. Because the more you can engulf yourself in that experience as a student in your intended program, the more you can make a fully informed decision on which school you should apply to or ultimately select. So I always encourage students, trust your gut when you're able to visit campus. I knew when I selected my undergraduate program, I got out of my parents' car. I was a junior in high school. And as soon as I stood out of that car, I felt like I feel like I'm home. I feel like I belong here. And that was a feeling I only had at one campus, but not the others. So I trusted that gut feeling and ultimately was very happy with my experience. So I encourage you to trust that as well. And if you can't get to campus, unfortunately, it's hard to really trust that piece of the puzzle. If you can't actually physically be there, see the spaces, meet the students, meet the faculty, assess how they treat you, those types of things are all very important. So take advantage of as many opportunities as you can to engage with campuses, even if it means spending a little bit of money now. Might be, flying out to a campus, staying overnight. Some campuses provide travel grants like we do. But if you are able to go and visit a campus and spend a little bit of money now, that might help you avoid a mistake of going to a program that maybe isn't the right program for you, because you didn't have a chance to kind of look at schools. I had a student a few years ago that came from one of the southern states. She had never been to New England, let alone to Rhode Island. And it was a very different kind of cultural atmosphere here than what she was used to at home. And she ultimately said, yeah, I don't feel as comfortable here as I thought I would. But the interesting thing about that is this student never visited our campus before she stood in her first class. She flew up here a couple of days before classes started in her apartment, but had never really been here and gotten a sense of that. But had she visited, she may have had the opportunity to decide, like, yeah, this feels good, or no, it doesn't. And that's fine. Our goal, again, in graduate admission, and this is true of grad staff really across the country in any program that you're working with, our goal should be to get you into the appropriate fit school for you. And I hope that students come to our campus and make a decision based on how they feel there and how they're treated and the communications and the engagement that they have from faculty and staff. That's the goal, so that hopefully they walk away from their visit on our campus or XYZ school somewhere else and they say, this really feels right, or it doesn't, and that's okay. Again, I hope that every student that I ever meet with, whether they come to Roger Williams or not, calls me in 5 or 10 years and says, that was the best decision I made to go to Roger Williams, or it was the best decision I made to go to XYZ school. So definitely try to engage as best as you can, ask questions, get the information you need so that you walk away saying, I have all of the information I need to make the best decision for me. And that decision may or may not lead me to this particular campus. So I hope that was helpful for you. If I can answer any questions or be a resource for you for coming to Roger or going to any other programs, please feel free to reach out to me. You see my phone number and email address there. And if you're watching this while we're still in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak and we're all working remotely at home, I hope you all stay safe and stay healthy. And we hope at some point we'll be able to see you on campus soon. So thanks for your time.